On the national level, the U.S. Supreme Court handed President Trump today a mixed set of decisions, giving him a win in one major case while limiting his authority in another. And here to help us make sense of what happened today is our White House correspondent, John Decker. John, you're also an attorney. Help us break down these two rulings and what they mean today.
Well, these two decisions were written by Chief Justice John Roberts. In one case, which the president praised, the administration won. Their position won the day at the Supreme Court. 6-3 decision, the super conservative majority at the Supreme Court, essentially saying that the president has the power to fire any member of any federal independent agency. This case involved the president's efforts to remove from her position a member of the Federal Trade Commission, Rebecca Slaughter. So she indeed will be removed from her position. The president, when asked earlier today, said he does not have an intention to take advantage of this power to en masse fire additional people from other federal independent regulatory agencies. The other case was a loss by President Trump. This involved the president's efforts to fire Lisa Cook as a member of the Federal Reserve Board. The Supreme Court ruling 5-4 in that decision. That's a carve-out. They essentially said this is the one exception that exists as it relates to this expanded presidential power, which was explained today by the highest court in the land.
And the Supreme Court also ruled today in a case that could have an impact on our upcoming midterm elections. What did the court decide there today?
Well, this particular case involved a Mississippi law that allows votes to be counted if they are postmarked, this is mail-in voting, postmarked before Election Day but received after Election Day. And this particular Mississippi law was challenged by the Republican National Committee, supported by the Trump administration. And this was another 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruling that indeed ballots can be counted if they're postmarked before Election Day or on Election Day itself, but received after Election Day. This particular ruling by the Supreme Court not only impacts Mississippi, but 13 other states that have similar laws, election laws, on the books.
John Decker joining us from Washington. John, appreciate your help and your time today.